Hello and welcome back to Speed Model. As promised last time, we are done with all the modeling. We're gonna move towards texturing of as many surfaces as we possibly can. Now here's the deal. I'm gonna have to cut away some things in this particular episode. You see, normally when it comes to the texturing stage of 3D modeling, basically what you do is you spend half the time searching for images and then half the time applying them to your meshes. Technically, it's not really 50-50. I find myself spending a lot of time searching for the actual image. But at any rate, we're actually gonna cut that part out of the video. As you would expect, it's going to be quite a copyright nightmare if I were to show, me just crawling through the internet for images. So instead, we are just gonna jump to the part where we already have all the final textures. I'll of course find images that I can legally use and commercialize, so to cover all the bases because I don't like to get in trouble. So yeah, unfortunately you're gonna have to miss out on that particular part of the experience, but I don't think it'll detract too much from the overall feel of the series. I will of course continue to show you the part where I actually apply the textures onto the meshes, so you are not really missing out on a whole lot. Now, most of the images I'll be using are going to be licensed Creative Commons, and what that means of course is I have to attribute them. In order to see all the links to the original images, do pop open the video description, you'll find all the links there. Anyway, enough waffling, let's jump into episode 8 of Speed Model. I begin by compiling a list of all the textures I want, by looking through the meshes in the scene, and by doing a little fly through around the house. I start off by creating an environment texture. I found this wonderful panorama that I tried to wrap around the house. I had quite a bit of trouble setting it up, and also realized that it didn't rotate with the house. Eventually, I ended up just using the simpler solution, creating a simple skybox with a cylinder. It takes a bit of adjustments, but finally the view out of the window looks correct, and we can move on. Next up is the keyboard. I took a picture of a very old keyboard lying around at home. In GIMP, I made some adjustments to make sure that it looks okay, particularly to correct for the perspective of the camera. It also looked kinda grimy, which thankfully could be fixed by converting the picture to grayscale. I pop over to the keyboard in Blender and apply the texture, making some adjustments so that a border appeared around the keys. I took the opportunity to curve up the edges of the keyboard so it looked less like a cube with an image on it. Then I turned my attention to the fishbowl, adding textures to the gravel. Next up, paintings. I found two images. This one is a photo with a very painterly look, so I applied an oil painting effect onto it. Back in Blender, I simply mapped both these images to paintings. Then a computer tower. This once again is my old computer. I decided it was far too reflective for its own good, so I take some time to blur out the front of the unit. Then I cut it out and adjust for perspective using the smudge tool to fill up the entire frame. Back in Blender, I apply the texture to the tower, while also coloring the rest of the tower black. Moving on, I've picked up several very nice looking wooden textures. This one was grayscale however, so I spent some time coloring it up. It was pretty similar to another one of the textures that I've gotten, so I had to pick a color that made it look different. Eventually I settled for a pale yellow and popped back into Blender to begin applying the textures. This takes a while since I need to poke around with the UVs for all the affected surfaces, so that the texture shows up with the correct size and orientation. Generally, Blender does a pretty good job at automatically mapping the surface of a 3D mesh to the 2D plane of an image, so all I need to do is to make sure that everything looks okay visually, and to scale up the mapping as necessary so the wood pattern doesn't appear too big. With that done, I turn my attention to the front door. The windows, which actually weren't wooden, I got confused for a while, and then I finally moved on to the work desk. This one also takes a while due to the complicated shape of the desk. Then I texture up the wardrobe in the bedroom, taking some time to unwrap all the surfaces and then moving on to the door, over to the bathroom door, and then back to the living room, where I tweaked the edges of the paintings. Then I decide to texture up the house itself, so I begin by adding a texture to the floor. I go for a simple wooden texture, a dark color for contrast against the walls. I tweak the orientation a little and bring the rest of the furniture in. I found another wood texture which I felt was nice but lacking a little. I used tone mapping to equalize the color and then made it tileable. Back in Blender, I apply it to the bathroom cabinet as well as the bar stools in the living room. But I decided it wasn't quite light enough, so I went back into GIMP to tweak it further. With that done, I turned my attention to the shower. I found a nice picture of tiny mottled blue tiles. I crop it so as to make it tileable and applied it to the shower. I make the texture bumpy by using the same image as a bump map so that the lighting creates a very realistic shine across the tiles. Next, wallpaper. I take a simple pattern image and apply it to all the walls. Since the walls span so much area, I did have to spend an extended amount of time tweaking up the UVs. I get bored of texturing, so I spend some time tweaking materials as well. I felt the roof looked a little bad, so I lightened up the material and made it blue. This once again contrasts nicely with the scene. I noticed some issues with the ceiling plane and decided I want to join it back with the main room mesh. Unfortunately, it didn't quite cooperate, so I ended up recreating the ceiling from scratch. In this part, I tried to make the lighting more even by adding some very soft light to the scene. While I was experimenting with this effect, I noticed I hadn't textured the bay windows, so I quickly fixed them up. Turns out those extra lights weren't quite necessary. My ambient occlusion settings made the room much darker than it needed to be. Tweaking that fixed the problem. I take another detour while finishing up to recolor the fridge. The blue clashed with the ceiling, so I made it a cheerful green instead. It's time to render. Here's a quick gauge of the render times. It's not too bad, about 3 minutes for the image. Of course, the render had to go and get stuck by the salt and pepper shaker, which added an extra 30 seconds. With that, it's time to look at some renders. The textures and reconfigured lighting really made a world of difference. And there you have it. As you can see, having image textures really change up the look and feel of everything. So yeah, hopefully, this has made the project even more interesting in your eyes. That wraps it up for this particular episode. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, you're watching 0612 TV. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked this video, consider checking out the rest of my work on my channel. Alternatively, you may be interested in the last season of Speed Model. If you'd like to show me some monetary support, I am on Patreon. You can find a link to my campaign in the video description. Of course, you can simply like this video or leave a comment. I'll be sure to respond as soon as I can. To keep in touch with my future uploads, do subscribe to this channel. And for even more updates, check out the official Twitter account for this channel at 0612TV. Thank you for your support.